Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl, filling in for Chris Mitchell. After a 9-month battle, Iraq took control of the ISIS stronghold in Mosul. Now the U.S.-led coalition remains focused, taking the fight to ISIS in Raqqa, Syria, the terror group's self-proclaimed capital. But as Chris Mitchell reports from the Golan Heights, some experts are warning the battle against the Islamic State might be a prelude to a much more dangerous battle just ahead.
Most believe the victory in Mosul and the current offensive against ISIS in Raqqa signals the end of the Islamic State Caliphate. But what happens next is the major question facing the Middle East.
You have so many different actors, both at the state and sub-state level, that are working in these very amorphous coalitions and then, against one another, with one another, that this is a very, very dangerous place. I mean, this becomes a tinderbox.
Carolyn Glick says a wide range of actors, including Syria, Russia, the U.S., Turkey, the Kurds, Sunni Islamist groups, Hezbollah, and Iran all make up that volatile mix.
You got a lot of people with weapons. You got a lot of fighting going on in a small territorial unit, and its implications both for great power relations and, of course, for the ability to cause massive instability in neighboring countries like Jordan, like you mentioned, Israel, and, of course, Iraq is sort of part of the same theater, are just almost mind-boggling.
From this vantage point on the Golan Heights, you can see that instability in action. A number of groups control Syria along Israel's border, including rebel forces and even ISIS. But the groups that concern Israel the most are the ones connected to Iran.
Not so far from here, we have thousands of Shiites, Iranian-backed militias that are fighting in Syria.
Avi Melamed says the West needs to know the war in Syria stretches beyond its borders.
The war in Syria is way beyond the civil war. Actually, what we see right now in Syria is a huge stage of a huge regional power struggle, roughly speaking, between two major forces. One are the Iranians and their backed militias on the one hand, and the other are the Arab Sunnis.
Glick warns Syria is flooded with Iranian troops.
The Syrian military today is Iranian, Hezbollah is Iranian, of course, Iran is Iranian, and they have an unlimited number of troops that they can bring in at will, and they are bringing into Syria from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, and it's basically a bottomless well of personnel that Iran can bring over and use as cannon fodder for its hegemonic aims in the Middle East.
Melamed warns Iran is trying to create a land bridge to Lebanon on the Mediterranean that would pose a great danger to Israel.
We have to remember that the Iranian regime vows the elimination of the State of Israel. Trying to launch a military front against Israel in the Golan Heights could result in a massive eruption, because Israel will not stand for that, and rightly so.
He says in order to better understand today's Middle East, you must go back in history to President Obama.
Obama's administration is definitely responsible for what I call a growing whirlpool of violence. The major reason for that is that Obama's administration, for whatever the reasons are, lined up with the Iranians, enabling the Iranians to expand their influence violently and proactively in different arenas in the region.
Now Iran's proxy Hezbollah poses an unprecedented threat to Israel.
They're in control of Lebanon and openly threatening war with Israel. And not only are their armaments sophisticated to a degree that we've never seen before in the hands of terrorists that are controlled by a terror regime, but their men under arms, their soldiers are battle-hardened, gruesome, brutal warriors who have been in the battlefield in Syria for the past 6 years.
Melamed believes the danger is greater now than when all of the Middle East ganged up on Israel in the 1967 Six-Day War.
It's much greater. Look, we are looking today at reality where you have dozens of thousands of Shiite militants that are already operating in Syria, massively armed, financed, and guided by the Iranians. The Iranians are, the same way they took over Lebanon in a remote control using the Hezbollah, the Iranians are envisioning a similar future to Syria.
That could lead to a confrontation with global implications.
And in Israeli signals, and the Israeli signals are going to be very powerful, because Israel is determined not to allow the Iranians to make the Golan Heights a stage of war. The ramifications of the potential development that I was now portraying, of that reality on the ground, the ramifications are not only local, they are not only regional, they are exceeding the regional level, they could be global.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the Golan Heights, Israel.
It began as a trickle of Syrian war wounded appealing to an unlikely source for help, Israel. Now the IDF is managing a full-fledged humanitarian aid mission. Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell brings us that story from the Golan Heights.
It's called Operation Good Neighbor.
In March 2013, approximately 2 years after the fighting in Syria started, at one night, 7 wounded Syrians came to our border seeking for help. A decision was made by the Israeli commanders and government to allow them to enter the country and to give them full medical treatment. Since then, many other wounded Syrians followed.
We're about 600 feet or 200 meters from the international border. Not far from here is where the Syrian refugees have been coming in to receive medical help from Israel.
It's a well-known fact that in Syria, the medical infrastructures are not functioning. Approximately 70% of the doctors fled the country. 1 year ago, we decided to expand our cooperation and help even further by starting Operation Good Neighbor.
CBN News received a special look at the many ways the IDF is helping along the border. Dr. Noam Fink is Chief Medical Officer in the Northern Command.
We started bringing in sick Syrians. Most of them are sick children with neglected medical diseases. We've taken them in to our hospitals, to our clinics. Almost every night, wounded Syrians come into Israel and get the best treatment, the same treatment we give our citizens.
In the past 4 years, Israel has helped more than 4,000 Syrians, many taken to Israeli hospitals. And the aid didn't stop there.
In the last year, we've understand that the Syrian population have lack of many things. Infrastructure as water and electricity, a lack of health care, medicine, equipment and doctors.
We've protected the identity of Lieutenant Colonel E because of his involvement in the project.
During the last year, we have established this project, this humanitarian aid project.
Many of the goods are donated by NGOs. They provide medicine, basic foods, and fuel for generators. They've even helped establish 2 medical clinics across the border for simpler cases.
Those people, as I told, that were educated to hate us, they're telling us today that are very grateful to the state of Israel.
The IDF hopes the humanitarian effort will bear good fruit.
We are believing that this humanitarian aid is our duty to help our neighbors, and we are believe that by doing this humanitarian aid, we are making good neighbors, and by this we can secure the Israeli-Syrian border.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News on the Golan Heights, Israel-Syrian border.
More than 50 Democratic and Republican members of the U.S. House of Representatives toured Israel in 2 partisan groups during August and said the U.S. has no greater ally than Israel. Sponsored by the American Israel Education Foundation, the goal is to provide congressmen with first-hand knowledge of U.S.-Israel relations and critical issues facing American policymakers like regional strategic threats and how recent events might impact the future. Both House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy and Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer say the United Front for Israel is meant to send a strong message.
We have shared values, shared security interests throughout the world, and there is no stronger bond between any ally that we have, being the only democracy in the Middle East. We have made a point of making sure that we have an overlapping time here in Israel together with Republicans and Democrats, because this is not a partisan issue.
We ought to overlap because we want to send a message of solidarity with Israel and a solidarity with the people of Israel, and the solidarity that we know is necessary if we are to defeat those, not only in the Middle East but around the world, who through terrorism and violence would put at risk our democracies, which obviously Israel and America share in common, but also put at risk our way of life.
Coming up, an archaeological discovery that sheds light on Jewish practices in the time of Jesus. Archaeologists excavating in the Galilee say they have found a rare workshop for the production of chalkstone vessels from the time of Jesus that sheds light on Jewish practices at that time. Take a look at what I saw when I visited the site in the area where biblical Cana would have been. Building in Israel often turns up ancient surprises, like this 2,000-year-old workshop during the construction of a new sports center in the area of biblical Cana in the Galilee.
What we have here is a cave, an artificially hewn cave, which was hewn out by ancient quarriers 2,000 years ago. So this was both a quarry and a workshop for the production of stone vessels.
Ariel University archaeologist Dr. Yonatan Adler is heading the excavation.
We have a huge amount of production waste, which includes both cores, which were taken out from the inside of mugs and bowls, which were produced here. It's vessels that had broken during the production process.
Archaeologists uncovered literally thousands of these cores at the site, and what the craftsmen threw away as production waste 2,000 years ago has become a treasure today.
This is an exciting find, and here for the first time we have production sites in Galilee, which we're able to excavate, and to learn more about the observance of ritual purity 2,000 years ago.
The New Testament specifically mentions stone vessels and those purification laws when Jesus turns the water into wine at the wedding in Cana. Now there were set there 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews.
Stone is a material that doesn't become impure, as opposed to pottery vessels. If they came in contact with something impure or a corpse or something like that, then the pottery vessel would become impure and it would have to be broken. It couldn't be reused.
Israel Antiquities Authority archaeologist Yardena Alexander said stone is considered pure all the time.
If the population was concerned with keeping the purity laws, then they would make sure that they'd have some of these chalk vessels in the houses.
Archaeologists haven't found any large stone vessels like the water jugs at Cana at the site yet, but they hope to be allowed to continue to excavate for more ancient treasures despite the building of the new sports center. From the wedding in Cana, we fast forward to 1967. 50 years ago, Israel reunited Jerusalem under Jewish sovereignty for the first time in 2,000 years. One of the heroes of that war was Arik Achmon, a main player in the battle for Jerusalem, and CBN's docudrama, In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem. CBN's Scott Ross takes a look at the life of that man who had a huge impact on Israel's past and future.
Arik Achmon was the chief intelligence officer for the 55th Paratrooper Brigade during the Six-Day War.
I have exactly 10 hours to prepare a unit to war. Usually, to make our operation in Jerusalem, you need about 40 hours. It's a craziness. For an intelligence officer, to El Arish, we have 3 weeks. Here, 10 hours.
As one of the soldiers who reunited Jerusalem, Achmon was honored at the Jerusalem premiere of the CBN docudrama In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem. I talked with Achmon at his Tel Aviv home about the war and his life. When you entered the city for the first time in, a millennium, how did that feel to you? I mean, that was an absolute historic moment.
I was very busy. We was after 3 days of very, very hard fight. Basically, I do not think about history. I was thinking about doing our job. But I must tell you that when we, the 2 of us, and with us 10 comrades of the commanding unit of the brigade, came to the mount, that was the first time I feel that I have participated in something special. But to say the truth, I was very sad.
Why?
Because 95 of our comrades dead in this fight. The mixture of these two feelings is living in me until today.
And that was only the beginning of Achmon's contribution to Israel.
Arik Achmon, who was one of the first Israeli paratroopers into the Old City in 1967, and actually led the crossing of the Suez Canal in the Yom Kippur War of 1973.
Author Yossi Klein Halevi wrote about Achmon in his 6-day war book, Like Dreamers. He told me how Achmon played the role of hero more than once.
Now, you talk about the transformation of Israel from an agrarian society to a high-tech superpower. And Arik Achmon, the guy who led the crossing of the canal, starts off as a boy living on one of these radical socialist kibbutzim, little agrarian settlement. He leaves the kibbutz and ends up becoming the CEO of Israel's domestic airline. Israel's economy was socialist in those years. He fights the trade unions, and he creates the first privatized company in the state of Israel and opens the way to the high-tech free economy that we have today. So for me, Arik Achmon is a multiple hero.
While Achmon left the kibbutz at age 40, he never forgot what he learned there.
Until today, I think the kibbutzim built Israel.
Where did you get the vision to move beyond kibbutzim life into a broader economy and developing beyond just the socialist idea?
My values is still there in the kibbutz. I believe in free economy that mingled with a social responsibility. Money is very, very, very important things, but not all. It's values that more important than money.
If the economy hadn't changed to a free economy, do you think that Israel would have survived?
I think that the Israeli economy is a miracle. In such extreme circumstances, to be one of the leading economies in the world.
For Achmon, even with Israel's great development, he's troubled by divisions among his people. What about your enemies who don't think you have a right to exist?
The enemies is enemies. We're strong enough to look after ourselves. The enemy of Israel is in us, inside us, not outside.
The future for this country now. You were a man of vision. You've been a man of vision. What's your vision for Israel now?
I believe in the eternity of the Jewish people. We have to get over this conflict. I believe in it. I'm not sure that I will live until this day, but I believe in it. We will overcome.
Scott Ross for CBN News in Tel Aviv.
On August 21st, parts of the United States will experience a total solar eclipse. That's got many Christians buzzing about whether or not it's a sign from God. We asked popular Israeli rabbi and historian Ken Spiro, what's the Jewish take on signs in the heavens, both in the Bible and for now?
It's a fundamental belief in Judaism that everything that happens in the world is for a meaning and it's a message hidden in there somewhere, even in an astronomical phenomenon. All the phenomenon that are supposed to be taking place soon in terms of alignment of stars and eclipses is creating almost zero buzz in the Jewish world. It's really going unnoticed. A, because I think there's been so much messianic expectation in Jewish history. Jews are very wary about reading into specific people, specific events, or specific astronomical phenomena that this is it, because then when it doesn't happen, it's a big letdown. I would say from the Jewish perspective, I'm a historian and a rabbi, but I tend to look much more at the actual events happening on the planet Earth. And the only thing I would say is, you know, since the rabbis always talk about the coming of the Messiah as a woman giving birth, the birth pangs, and the basic idea behind that is that just as a woman giving birth goes through contractions that get closer and closer together and more intense as you approach the birth, so too events on the planet Earth will get more and more intense and happen much more rapidly. And certainly I would say we see that things are speeding up very dramatically in the world, the change that is taking place, the political upheaval, the technological advances. As to whether that is linked to astronomical events that are coming, we'll only know, it's pretty soon, we'll only know at that time, but basically it's not, I think it's a much bigger buzz in the Christian world than it is in the Jewish world. And we could be hitting that end of days scenario. Certainly time is definitely running out. And as we see by looking at what's going on in the world in a positive and a negative way, I mean, the rebirth of the State of Israel, the reunification of Jerusalem, we just celebrated the 50th anniversary of that. I mean, that's unbelievable. That's prophecy coming true before our eyes. What we do see is that the prophecies that are predicted pretty much in the Bible, by the way, and some of them are very unusual, unique, and unlikely, but they either have happened or are in the process of happening. And we're only a few headlines away from direct convergence of that biblical end of days scenario with the headlines in the news today.
The upcoming solar eclipse won't be visible in Israel, but Israelis did see a partial lunar eclipse recently. Take a look at our video of that lunar eclipse as an example of what you can see on our social media channels. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And remember, the God that's watching over Israel, and you and me, neither slumbers nor sleeps. I'm Julie Stahl. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.